The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the curved seats that rose up like a metal mountain. The air buzzed with the sound of translators working to turn hundreds of different languages into something everyone could understand. At the center of it all, Ambassador Sarah Chun sat alone at a small table. Her dark blue uniform looked tiny compared to the massive forms around her. The Veltar delegates towered above everyone else, their crystal bodies catching the light and throwing rainbows across the walls. The Zephyrians floated in their energy, bubbles looking like living clouds of silver mist. The ancient Corvin collective members sat perfectly still, their metal faces showing no emotion at all. Sarah had been sitting in that same chair for 3 days now. 3 days of listening to charges against her species. 3 days of watching alien faces stare down at her with something between fear and disgust. 3 days of being told that humans were a problem that needed to be solved. The chief arbitrator stood up. He was a Corvin, one of the oldest races in the galaxy. His voice came out flat and cold through the speakers. "We have heard all the evidence," he said. "The charges against the human species are serious. They have been accused of aggressive expansion beyond their assigned sectors. They have been accused of violating the sacred neutrality zones. Most serious of all, they have been accused of excessive force in their destruction of the Skarn invasion fleet at Proxima." Sarah kept her face calm, but inside she felt a familiar anger. The Skarn had attacked without warning. They had wiped out 3 human colonies, killing millions of innocent people. When the human fleet finally caught up to the Skarn raiders, they had fought back with everything they had. Every single Skarn ship had been destroyed. Not one had escaped to hurt anyone else. The galaxy called it excessive force. Humans called it justice. "The human delegate will stand for the reading of our decision," the arbitrator said. Sarah stood up slowly. She was not tall compared to most beings in the hall, but she held her head high. Around her, thousands of alien eyes watched every move she made. "The Galactic Council finds the human species guilty on all charges," the arbitrator announced. The words echoed through the massive hall. "Humans have shown themselves to be too violent, too unpredictable, and too dangerous to remain part of galactic civilization." Whispers filled the air as translators carried the words to every corner of the hall. Some beings nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "The sentence is as follows," the arbitrator continued. "Humanity is expelled from the Galactic Council effective immediately. All trade agreements with human worlds are ended. All human citizens must leave Council space within 1 standard year. Human-controlled star systems will be placed under quarantine for 50 years. No Council ship may enter human space. No human ship may leave it." Sarah listened to every word. She had expected this. The trial had been just for show. The decision had been made long before she ever sat in that chair. "Does the human delegate have anything to say before this council?" the arbitrator asked. The hall fell completely silent. Thousands of beings waited to hear what she would say. They probably expected her to beg, or maybe to threaten them. Humans were supposed to be emotional and unpredictable, after all. Sarah looked around the great hall one last time. She had worked in this place for 15 years. She had made friends here, or thought she had. She had helped solve disputes and prevent wars. She had believed that humans belonged among the stars with all these other species. She had been wrong. "We understand," Sarah said simply. Her voice was calm and clear. "We will comply immediately." The silence stretched on. Some beings leaned forward, waiting for more. Waiting for anger or tears or desperate promises. But Sarah just stood there, looking perfectly composed. "That is all?" the arbitrator asked. He sounded almost disappointed. "That is all," Sarah confirmed. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small golden badge. It marked her as an official representative to the council. She had worn it with pride for so many years. Now she placed it gently on the table in front of her. The other 4 members of the human delegation stood up as well. They each placed their badges on the table without saying a word. Then they turned and walked toward the exit. The great hall erupted in noise as thousands of beings started talking at once. Some seemed confused by the quiet response. Others looked relieved that the dangerous humans were finally leaving. A few even looked worried, though Sarah could not imagine why. She did not look back as she walked to the door. Behind her, alien voices rose and fell like ocean waves. She heard her name mentioned several times, usually followed by words like typical human arrogance or good riddance. Outside the council chambers, the 5 humans walked through corridors they knew better than their own homes. They passed restaurants where they used to eat lunch. They walked by offices where they had worked late into the night trying to solve problems that seemed important at the time. "So that's it then," said James Park, the deputy ambassador. He was young for a diplomat, barely 30 years old. 50 years of quarantine. "That's what they said," Sarah replied. She kept walking, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. "Do you think they'll change their minds?" asked Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, their science liaison. "Maybe when they realize what they're losing." Sarah stopped walking. The others stopped too, waiting for her answer. Through the windows, she could see human ships in the docking bays. Soon those ships would be leaving and never coming back. "They won't change their minds," Sarah said finally. "They're afraid of us. They've always been afraid of us. Today they just decided to do something about it. Afraid of us?" James sounded genuinely confused. Why would they be afraid? "We're outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's exactly why they're afraid. We're only 3% of the galactic population, but somehow we're always in the middle of everything. Every major breakthrough, every successful peacekeeping mission, every time someone needs to solve an impossible problem, humans are there. They've started to wonder what would happen if we ever decided to stop helping and start taking instead." She started walking again. "Today, they found out we're not going to give them the chance to find out. We're leaving quietly, just like they wanted." "And then what?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. "Then we go home," Sarah said. "We take care of our own, and we let them take care of themselves for a change." They reached the docking bay where their ship was waiting. The crew was already on board, ready to leave. As they climbed up the ramp, Sarah turned back one last time to look at the council station. It was beautiful in its own way. Miles of gleaming metal and crystal, home to millions of beings from across the galaxy. For over a century, it had been the center of galactic civilization. The place where different species came together to solve problems and build a better future. Now, it was just another place where humans were not welcome. "Take us home," Sarah told the pilot as she settled into her seat. The ship lifted off smoothly and headed for the jump gate. Through the viewport, Sarah watched the council station grow smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light among the stars. Behind them, in the great hall, thousands of beings were still talking about the quiet way the humans had left. Most of them felt relieved. The dangerous, unpredictable humans were finally gone. It would be quite some time before any of them realized their mistake. The news spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. Within hours, every human settlement, every human worker, every human family knew about the council's decision. The humans had been expelled. They had 1 year to leave council space, but most of them had already made up their minds to leave much sooner than that. On Kepler Station, the galaxy's most important research center, Dr. Elena Vasquez, was packing her personal belongings into a small case. Her hands moved carefully as she wrapped up 20 years of research notes and data crystals. Around her, the laboratory buzzed with activity as other human scientists did the same thing. "Elena, please reconsider," said her research partner. A Veltar named Quex-47, his crystal body shimmered with colors that meant distress in his species. "We are so close to finishing the quantum communication project. Just a few more months, and we could have instant communication across the entire galaxy." Elena looked up from her packing. Quex had been her partner for 8 years. They had worked together on problems that seemed impossible to solve. They had shared late nights in the lab and celebrated breakthroughs that would change how the galaxy worked. She had considered him a friend. The council made their choice, Quex, she said quietly. They don't want humans involved in galactic affairs anymore. That includes galactic research. But the project needs you, Quex insisted. His crystals flashed brighter. Your understanding of human neural patterns is what made the breakthrough possible. Without you, it could take decades to finish the work. Elena sealed the case and picked it up. Then I guess it will take decades. She walked toward the door, but Quex moved to block her way. For a moment, they looked at each other across the species divide that had always existed but never seemed to matter before. This is foolish, Quex said. You are letting pride make your decisions. The council was wrong to expel your species, but you don't have to punish the galaxy for their mistake. I'm not punishing anyone, Elena replied. I'm just going home. She stepped around him and walked out of the laboratory. Behind her, she could hear other human scientists having similar conversations with their alien colleagues. The sounds of confusion and argument followed her down the corridor. At the transport hub, Elena joined a line of humans waiting to book passage back to human space. The line stretched around the building. Families with children, single workers, elderly couples who had planned to retire on Kepler Station, all of them carrying what they could and leaving behind lives they had built over decades. Dr. Vasquez? A young voice called her name. She turned to see Marcus Chun, one of her graduate students. He was human, barely 25 years old, and brilliant in ways that still surprised her. Are you really leaving? He asked. I thought maybe you would try to get special permission to stay. Your work is too important to abandon. Elena looked at the young man who reminded her of herself at that age, full of hope and confidence that the galaxy was a reasonable place where good work would always find support. Marcus, she said gently, the council didn't just vote against our diplomats or our military, they voted against all of us. Every human. They decided we don't belong here, and they're probably right. But we do belong, Marcus protested. Look around you. Humans are everywhere, doing important work, making things better. And now we won't be, Elena said. The galaxy will have to figure out how to do those jobs without us. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on thousands of worlds and stations. Human merchants finished their last deals and closed their businesses. Human doctors transferred their patients to alien colleagues and packed their medical equipment. Human teachers said goodbye to students who would have to finish their education under someone else's guidance on the trade world of Nexus Prime. Captain Rebecca Torres was selling her cargo ship to a Zephyrian merchant. The ship was her life, her home, and her business all in one. She had spent 15 years building up trade routes that connected dozens of worlds across 3 sectors. This is a good ship, the Zephyrian said, his form shifting like silver mist as he examined the vessel. But the routes you have established will be difficult to maintain without human connections. That's not my problem anymore, Rebecca said, signing the transfer documents. I'm sure you'll figure it out, the Zephyrian paused. Many of my people are concerned about this human exodus. Your species has become deeply integrated into our economic systems. Your departure may cause significant disruption. Rebecca looked up from the papers. Then maybe the council should have thought about that before they threw us out. She took her payment and walked away from the ship that had been her whole world. Behind her, the new owner was already talking to his assistants about how they might keep her old trade routes working. She doubted they would succeed. The routes depended on personal relationships she had built over years of honest dealing. Those relationships would not transfer to someone else. On the military station at Volf's Gate, Colonel James Mitchell was handing over command of the Joint Peacekeeping Force to his Corven replacement. The ceremony was formal and proper as military. Ceremonies always were. But beneath the surface, everyone could feel the tension. The 3rd Human Regiment has served with distinction for 12 years, Colonel Mitchell said as he transferred the unit's battle flag to General Kex Prime. I trust they will be replaced by forces equally capable. General Kex Prime's metal face showed no expression, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. The human units have been effective in their duties. It may take time to achieve the same level of operational success. Mitchell almost smiled at that. The Korvan was trying to be diplomatic, but they both knew the truth. Human forces had the best combat record in the peacekeeping corps. They had solved problems that other species couldn't handle and won battles that should have been impossible. "I'm sure you'll manage," Mitchell said. He saluted one last time and walked away. Behind him, the alien officers were already discussing how to redistribute the human responsibilities among the remaining forces. None of them sounded confident about their ability to fill the gap. The same pattern repeated itself across the galaxy. In research centers and factories, on ships and stations, in offices and workshops, humans were quietly packing up and leaving. They finished their current projects where possible. They transferred their responsibilities to colleagues who often had no idea how to handle them. They said polite goodbyes to friends and coworkers who still couldn't quite believe this was really happening on Earth. The news channels were full of reports about the returning citizens. Ships arrived daily, carrying people who had left decades ago to build new lives among the stars. They came back changed by their experiences, but they came back willingly. "It's strange," said Maria Santos, a news reporter interviewing returning citizens at the spaceport. "Most of these people seem almost relieved to be coming home." Her interviewee, a middle-aged man who had worked as an engineer on Veltar Prime, nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe we were trying too hard to fit in," he said. "Maybe it's time we stopped worrying about what other species think of us and focused on taking care of our own." Similar conversations were happening across human space as families reunited and communities grew larger with each arriving ship. There was sadness about leaving behind lives and careers, but there was also something else, a sense of purpose that many hadn't felt in years. In the council chambers, the first economic reports were starting to come in. The Minister of Commerce, an elderly Zephyrian named Wind Through Stars, reviewed the data with growing concern. "The human departure is causing more disruption than we anticipated," she reported to the emergency session. Their involvement in galactic trade was more extensive than our initial assessments indicated. "How extensive?" asked the chief arbitrator. "They were involved in approximately 40% of all intersector trade arrangements," Wind Through Stars admitted. "Either as direct participants or as intermediary facilitators, many of these arrangements are now in jeopardy." Around the chamber, delegates shifted uncomfortably. The humans had only been gone for 72 hours, and already the effects were being felt. "Surely other species can fill these roles," said a Korvan delegate. "In theory, yes," the Commerce Minister replied. "In practice, it may take years to rebuild the trust networks and operational procedures that humans had established. The immediate economic cost could be substantial." The chief arbitrator dismissed these concerns with a wave of his metal hand. Short-term disruption was expected. "The galaxy survived for millions of years before humans joined the council. We will adapt." But as the days passed and more reports came in, some delegates began to wonder if adaptation would be as easy as they had assumed. The humans were leaving quietly and efficiently just as they had promised. But they were taking something with them that no one had expected to lose. The galaxy was about to learn just how much difference 3% of the population could make when that 3% had been working twice as hard as everyone else. 6 months had passed since the humans left council space. At first, most beings across the galaxy barely noticed their absence. The galaxy was huge after all, and 3% of the population seemed like such a small number. But small problems had a way of growing into big ones. When nobody was paying attention, the first real crisis started in the Zephyrian Empire's communication network. For 20 years, the system had connected thousands of worlds across 4 dimensions, allowing instant communication anywhere in Zephyrian space. It was considered one of the great technological achievements of the modern galaxy. Commander Flux of Silver stared at the error messages flooding his control center. Red warnings blinked across dozens of screens as communication nodes went offline one by one. The network was failing and nobody knew why. When did the problem start? He asked his chief technician, a young Zephyrian named Current of Stars. 3 days ago, sir, Current of Stars replied, her form shifting nervously. "First, it was just minor delays in the outer sectors. Then whole communication hubs started going dark. We've lost contact with 47 worlds so far. Flux of Silver studied the technical reports, but the numbers meant little to him. He was a military commander, not an engineer. What did the technical team say? That's the problem, sir, Current of Stars sighed quietly. The engineers who designed and maintained the deep network protocols were mostly human. They trained some of our people, but not in the advanced systems. When the humans left, they took their knowledge with them. The commander felt a cold shock run through his energy form. Are you telling me that our entire communication network depends on human knowledge? Not entirely, sir. We can still handle basic communications. But the advanced systems that allow instant transmission across dimensional barriers, the error correction protocols, the security systems that prevent enemy interference, those were all human innovations. Without them, we're reduced to old-fashioned light-speed communications. Flux of Silver looked out at the stars through his office window. Light-speed communications meant messages that took years to cross the Empire. It meant isolated worlds, delayed orders, and a breakdown of everything that held their civilization together. Get me a connection to the council chambers, he ordered. Sir, with the network failures that could take several hours. Then start. Now, similar problems were appearing across the galaxy. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, the Veltar extraction operations had ground to a complete halt. The crystal beings had built their entire mining industry around efficiency algorithms designed by human engineers 15 years earlier. Supervisor Hex 12 walked through the silent mining complex, his crystal body reflecting the dim emergency lights. The massive extraction machines stood motionless, their computer screens showing error messages in human script that none of his workers could read. The algorithms were supposed to be simple, he reported to his supervisors back on Veltar Prime. The humans said they designed them to be easy to maintain. Then why aren't they working? Came the reply over the crackling communication line. Because they're not simple at all, Hex 12 admitted. They're incredibly complex systems that just appear simple on the surface. The humans built in thousands of small adjustments and corrections that keep the machines running efficiently. Without constant updates and maintenance, the whole system breaks down. The extraction operations on KEPLER 442b had been producing raw materials for half the Veltar industrial base. Now those factories were facing shortages that would ripple through their entire economy, but the real test came when the Skarn remnant decided to strike back. The Skarn had been defeated badly at Proxima, with their entire invasion fleet destroyed. But enough survivors had escaped to rebuild their forces in the dark spaces between stars. They had spent months watching and waiting, studying the new reality of a galaxy without human military presence. Their target was the Centauri trade route, one of the busiest shipping lanes in Council space. 40 merchant vessels traveled the route every day, carrying goods between the core worlds and the outer colonies. The route was protected by a joint peacekeeping force of 500. Ships from 6 different species. Admiral Krell of the Skarn looked at the tactical display and smiled with his razor-sharp teeth. The humans always made this look so difficult, but they're not here anymore. His fleet of 200 ships dropped out of hyperspace right in the middle of the trade route. It should have been easy prey, merchant vessels with light escorts, scattered across several light hours of space. A simple hit-and-run operation that would net them supplies and send a message to the galaxy. The peacekeeping force responded exactly as Krell expected. They moved to protect the merchant ships in tight formations, following standard defensive doctrine. It was textbook military strategy, the kind taught in academies across the galaxy. It was also exactly what Krell was counting on. The first attack wave hit the peacekeeping fleet from 3 directions at once. The Skarn had studied every standard tactical manual in the galactic database. They knew how Council forces would respond to different threats, because those responses were written down in official doctrine that never changed. Commander Vex Prime of the Corvan fleet found himself watching his carefully organized formation fall apart under the Skarn assault. His ships moved exactly as they should according to military regulations, but somehow the enemy was always one step ahead. "All units, execute defensive pattern 7, he ordered. "Pattern 7 is already compromised," his tactical officer reported. "Enemy forces have positioned themselves to counter that maneuver. Then execute Pattern 12. "Also compromised, sir." Vex Prime stared at his tactical display in growing frustration. The Skarn seemed to know every move his forces would make before they made it. It was as if the enemy had access to all their strategic planning. Then he realized the horrible truth. The enemy did have access to their strategic planning. Every standard tactical doctrine was available in public databases. The Skarn had simply studied them all and prepared counters for each one. In the past, human commanders had never relied purely on standard doctrine. They improvised, adapted, and did the unexpected. They looked at each battle as a unique puzzle, to be solved, not a standard scenario to be handled by the book. That unpredictability had made them impossible to counter effectively, but there were no human commanders in this fleet. Just officers who followed the rules they had been taught, using tactics that could be found in any military textbook. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the peacekeeping force had lost 200 ships, 40% of their total strength. The Skarn had lost only 30 vessels before retreating with their captured prizes. Admiral Orcs of the Veltar fleet sent her report to the Council with crystal-clear reluctance. The enemy demonstrated superior tactical flexibility and strategic preparation. Our forces performed according to standard doctrine but were unable to adapt to unexpected situations. She paused before adding the most damaging line in the report. Request immediate tactical consultation from human military advisors. The response came back within hours. Human military advisors are no longer available to Council forces. Similar requests were flooding in from across the galaxy. Diplomatic negotiations that had stalled without human mediators. Scientific projects that had ground to a halt without human researchers. Trade disputes that escalated into conflicts. Because nobody could find the creative solutions that humans had always provided, the galaxy was learning a hard lesson about the difference between participation and integration. Humans hadn't just been participants in galactic civilization, they had been the glue that held many of its systems together. In the council chambers, emergency sessions were being held every day. The chief arbitrator looked older somehow, his metal face showing wear that hadn't been there 6 months earlier. "The economic disruption is more severe than projected," reported the Minister of Commerce. 17 major trade routes are operating at reduced capacity. Industrial output is down 12% across all sectors. "The military situation is equally concerning," added the defense minister. "Pirate attacks are up 60%. Our response times have doubled. Casualty rates in peacekeeping operations have tripled. And the diplomatic corps is reporting a breakdown in several ongoing negotiations," said the Foreign Affairs Minister. "Conflicts that should have been resolved quickly are dragging on for months." The chief arbitrator listened to each report with growing unease. Around him, the other council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The humans had been gone for only 6 months, but their absence was being felt everywhere. "These are temporary difficulties," he insisted. "The galaxy will adapt to function without human involvement." But privately, he was beginning to wonder if that was true. The humans hadn't just taken their ships and their people when they left. They had taken something else, something harder to define but impossible to replace. They had taken their way of thinking, their ability to see problems from new angles, to find solutions that nobody else had considered, to adapt and improvise when standard approaches failed. Without that flexibility, the galaxy was discovering that many of its systems were more fragile than anyone had realized. 2 years had passed since the humans left council space. The galaxy had not collapsed, but it was clearly struggling. What had once been smooth operations now moved with the grinding slowness of broken machinery. Trade routes that had hummed with efficiency now faced constant delays. Scientific projects that should have taken months were stretching into years. Military operations that should have been simple police actions turned into costly battles. The council had learned to live with these problems. They told themselves it was the price of independence from human influence. Better to struggle alone than to rely on a species too. Dangerous to trust. But then the deep space sensors detected something that changed everything. The first alarm came from the monitoring station at Perseus Edge, the farthest outpost in Council space. Technician Vel 442 was working a routine shift when her instruments began screaming warnings she had never heard before. "Supervisor," she called across the control room. "I'm getting massive energy readings from dark space. Something big is heading our way." Supervisor Keck 17 floated over to her station, his metallic form reflecting the red warning lights that had begun flashing throughout the facility. "Define big," he said. "Bigger than anything in our databases," Vel 442 replied her, crystal body pulsing with stress colors. "The computer keeps trying to classify the contacts, but it can't. The energy signatures don't match any known ship design." Keck 17 studied the readings himself. What he saw made his circuits run cold. "How many contacts?" "Over 10,000, sir. And they're moving fast. Much faster than they should be able to at that size." Within hours, the readings were confirmed by monitoring stations across the outer rim. Something vast was approaching from the darkness between galaxies, and it was heading directly for the most populated systems in Council space. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was called immediately. For the first time in 2 years, every available delegate was present. The great hall buzzed with nervous energy as beings who rarely agreed on anything tried to make sense of the crisis. "The objects are ships," announced Admiral Flux of Silver, now serving as the Council's military coordinator. "We've managed to get clearer readings as they approach. They're enormous. Some of them are larger than our biggest space stations." "Chief." Arbitrator Kexprime's voice carried across the hall with mechanical precision. "What species builds ships of that size? Are they from outside our galaxy?" "We believe so, sir." "But that's not the worst part." Admiral Flux of Silver paused, his energy form flickering with uncertainty. "The ship designs match descriptions in our oldest historical archives. We think they're Devourer vessels." The hall fell completely silent. The name Devourer was known to every species in the galaxy, passed down through thousands of years of historical records. They were the nightmare from the distant past, the cosmic horror that had once consumed entire civilizations before mysteriously disappearing into dark space. "That's impossible," said Minister Wind Through Stars, her Zephyrian form rippling with disbelief. "The Devourers were destroyed millennia ago." "The histories are clear about that." "The histories are clear that they were defeated and driven back," Admiral Flux of Silver corrected. "But they were never destroyed. They retreated to dark space and have been rebuilding their forces ever since." Around the hall, delegates began talking at once. Some demanded proof, others called for immediate military mobilization, and a few simply sat in stunned silence. The chief arbitrator had to use the chamber's sonic dampeners to restore order. "What do we know about their capabilities?" he asked. The admiral's form grew dimmer. "According to historical records, Devourer ships consume matter to fuel themselves and create new vessels. They strip entire planets down to their cores, converting the raw materials into more ships and weapons. The last time they appeared, it took the combined fleets of every galactic civilization to drive them back." "Then we'll combine our fleets again," declared General Torix Prime of the Veltar forces. "We have more ships now than our ancestors." "Better technology, more firepower." "With respect, General, we have a problem," the Admiral replied. "The previous campaign against the Devourers was coordinated by human strategists, specifically by Admiral Marcus Reed and his tactical staff. Their battle plans and strategies are what made victory possible." The mention of human involvement sent another wave of uncomfortable murmurs through the hall. Several delegates turned to look at the empty section where human representatives had once sat. "Surely our current military leaders can develop effective strategies," said the chief arbitrator. "We don't need human assistance to defend ourselves." "Perhaps," Admiral Flux of Silver said carefully. But there's something else. The Devourers have had thousands of years to study our previous tactics. If they're returning now, it's because they've found ways to counter the strategies that worked before. We need new approaches, new thinking. We need the kind of tactical innovation that humans were known for. The uncomfortable silence stretched on. Every being in the hall was thinking the same thing, but none wanted to say it out loud. They needed help from the species they had expelled for being too dangerous. What about our own military academies? Asked a Corvan delegate. Surely they can produce innovative tactics. General Torix Prime's crystal form flickered with embarrassment. Our academies teach standard doctrine based on proven strategies. They focus on following established procedures and maintaining discipline. Innovation and improvisation were considered human characteristics. We discourage such thinking in favor of reliable, predictable methods. Then we'll have to learn quickly, the chief arbitrator declared. Send word to all military commands. Begin developing new tactical approaches immediately. But even as he spoke, everyone in the hall knew it wouldn't be enough. Learning to think like humans would take years, maybe decades. They had days, perhaps weeks before the Devourer fleet arrived. 3 days later, the first reports came in from the outer colonies. The mining world of Titan's Rest had gone silent. When scout ships investigated, they found nothing but empty space where the planet had been. Even the asteroids in the system were gone, consumed completely. Then Kepler 186f disappeared, then Volf 359b, then New Geneva. Each time, the pattern was the same. The Devourer fleet would arrive, strip the system of all matter, and move on with more ships than they had started with. Admiral Flux of Silver stood before the Council's emergency war cabinet, trying to explain what their fleets were facing. We sent the 5th Battle Group to intercept the enemy at the Vega system. Of the 300 ships we deployed, only 12 returned. What happened? Demanded General Torix Prime. The Devourers used tactics we've never seen before, the Admiral replied. They somehow turned our own weapons against us, converted our ship hulls into additional fleet assets, and demonstrated coordination patterns that our strategic computers can't analyze. Our forces are following proper military doctrine, insisted Commander Vex Prime. How can proper doctrine fail so completely? Admiral Flux of Silver's energy form pulsed with frustration. Because proper doctrine assumes your enemy will also follow reasonable patterns. The Devourers don't think like us. They don't fight like us. Every time we try a standard military response, they counter it in ways we never expected. The reports kept getting worse. Battle group after battle group was sent to slow the Devourer advance, and each one was destroyed with minimal losses too. The enemy. The alien fleet was not just winning battles. They were learning from each encounter. Adapting faster than the Council forces could develop new strategies. We need different thinking, Admiral Flux of Silver finally said what everyone was avoiding. We need someone who can look at this problem from angles we haven't considered. Someone who can improvise and adapt as quickly as the enemy does. You're talking about humans, said the chief arbitrator. Yes, I am. The silence in the war cabinet was deafening. They all knew what that meant. 2 years ago, they had expelled the humans for being too dangerous and unpredictable. Now those same qualities were exactly what the galaxy needed to survive. Can we contact them? Asked Minister Winthrough-Stars. Admiral Flux of Silver's form flickered. We've been trying for weeks. Human space is completely silent. No communications, no ship traffic, nothing. It's as if they've disappeared entirely. That's impossible. Entire civilizations don't just vanish. According to our long-range sensors, human space is surrounded by some kind of energy barrier. We can't penetrate it with scanning beams, and any probe we send simply disappears. Whatever the humans are doing in there, they don't want to be disturbed. General Torix Prime's crystal body rang with harmonic frustration. So we're facing the greatest threat in galactic history, and the one species that might be able to help us has made themselves unreachable. It appears so, the Admiral confirmed. Outside the Council chambers, the first refugee ships were beginning to arrive. Millions of beings fleeing from the outer systems, carrying reports of worlds consumed and fleets destroyed. The great stations that orbited the core worlds were filling up with displaced populations who had nowhere else to go. And still the Devourer fleet advanced, growing larger with every system it consumed. The energy readings from their ships suggested they were not. The Devourer fleet had consumed half the Outer Rim territories and was now approaching the core worlds. Billions of beings had died or fled before the advancing darkness. The Council's combined fleets, despite having millions of ships at their disposal, could do nothing but slow the enemy advance at terrible cost. Chief Arbitrator Kex Prime stood in the observation deck of the Council's command station, watching the evacuation ships streaming past like metal rivers. Each ship carried thousands of refugees from worlds that no longer existed. The lucky ones had escaped with their lives. The unlucky ones had been converted into raw materials for more Devourer vessels. "Sir," called Admiral Flux of Silver from behind him. "The final battle group reports are in." Kex Prime turned away from the window. He had been dreading this moment for days. "How many did we lose?" "Battle Group Omega engaged the enemy at Proxima Centauri," the Admiral reported, his energy form dim with exhaustion. "Of the 2,000 ships we sent, 43 returned." The numbers hit Kex Prime like a physical blow. 2,000 ships, crews numbering in the millions, all gone in a matter of hours, and they had barely slowed the enemy down. "The survivors report that the Devourers have developed new ship types," the Admiral continued. "Vessels that can somehow predict our movements and counter our tactics before we even execute them. It's as if they can read our strategic planning." "Because they can," said a new voice from the entrance to the observation deck. Both leaders turned to see Minister Wind Through Stars approaching, her Zephyrian form rippling with distress. In her energy tendrils she carried a data crystal that glowed with importance. "What do you mean?" asked Kex Prime. "I've been analyzing the Devourer combat patterns with our historical research teams," Wind Through Stars explained. "The enemy isn't just using superior technology. They're using our own strategic doctrine against us. Every battle plan in our military databases, every tactical manual taught in our academies, the Devourers have studied them all and developed perfect counters." Admiral Flux of Silver flickered with confusion. "How is that possible?" "Our databases are secured." "They didn't need to access our databases," Wind Through Stars replied. "They simply observed our previous battles against them thousands of years ago. They learned how we think, how we plan, how we react to different situations. Then they spent millennia developing ways to defeat those patterns." The horrible truth was becoming clear. The Council forces were losing because they fought exactly as expected. Their tactics were predictable, their strategies were documented, and their responses followed established patterns that could be countered by any enemy smart enough to study them. "There's more," Wind Through Stars said, activating the data crystal. A holographic display showed the current positions of both fleets. "According to our projections, the Devourer fleet will reach the core worlds within 6 days. When they do, they'll have enough ships to consume every inhabited system in the galaxy simultaneously." Kex Prime stared at the display in growing horror. The Devourer fleet had grown enormous, fed by the matter from hundreds of consumed worlds. It was now larger than any force in galactic history. "What about the emergency defense plan?" he asked. "Useless?" Admiral Flux of Silver admitted. "Every defense plan we have is based on predictable enemy behavior. The Devourers don't behave predictably. They adapt faster than we can respond." A long silence filled the observation deck. Outside, more evacuation ships continued their desperate exodus from the core worlds, but there was nowhere left to run. The Devourers would consume everything eventually. "There's one option," Wind Through Stars said quietly. Both males turned to look at her. The minister's energy form was pulsing with emotions that were hard to read. "We could try to contact the humans again," she said. "We've been trying for months," Admiral Flux of Silver protested. "Human space is sealed off completely. No communications get through." "Then we go there in person," Wind Through Stars replied. Send a diplomatic mission to the edge of human space. Make direct contact. Kex Prime's mechanical voice carried a note of bitter irony. You want us to beg for help from the species we expelled for being too dangerous? I want us to survive. Wind Through Stars shot back. And the only way we survive is if we admit we made a mistake. The chief arbitrator was quiet for a long moment. Around him, the command center buzzed with activity as staff tried to coordinate the evacuation of entire star systems. It was organized. Chaos, but it was still chaos. Without human logistics expertise, even their evacuation efforts were clumsy and inefficient. Do it, he said finally. Send a diplomatic mission to human space. Try to make contact. The fastest ship in the Council fleet was a Zephyrian scout vessel called Silver Wind. Captain Current of Stars had volunteered for what everyone knew was probably a suicide mission. Her ship carried a small diplomatic team, including Minister. Wind Through Stars herself. The journey to human space took 2 days at maximum speed. As they approached the quarantine zone, the ship's sensors began picking up the energy barrier that surrounded all human territories. It was unlike anything. In their databases, a field of force that seemed to bend space itself around the protected systems. Try to send a message, Wind Through Stars ordered. The communications officer, a young Veltar named Hex-23, worked at his controls for several minutes before shaking his crystal head. The barrier is reflecting all our transmissions back. Nothing. Gets through. What about moving closer? I wouldn't recommend it, Minister. The energy readings suggest that anything touching the barrier simply ceases to exist. Wind Through Stars studied the readings on her screen. The humans had built something incredible during their years of isolation. Something that made their territory completely unreachable from the outside. Wait, said Captain Current of Stars from the pilot station. I'm detecting movement inside the barrier. Something's coming toward us. On the main screen, a ship began to materialize. It was clearly of human design, but unlike any human vessel in their databases. The hull seemed to shimmer with internal light, and its shape suggested technologies that shouldn't have been possible. Incoming transmission, reported Hex-23. Put it on the main screen. When Through Stars ordered, the image that appeared showed a human woman in an unfamiliar uniform. She looked older than most humans, the minister remembered, with gray streaking her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of hard experience. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Human Defense Force. The woman said, You are approaching restricted space. State your business. Wind Through Stars stepped forward, her energy form brightening with hope. Admiral Chun, I am Minister Wind Through Stars of the Galactic Council. We need to speak with human leadership urgently. The galaxy is facing an existential threat. Aware of the Devourer incursion, Admiral Chun replied coolly. Our monitoring stations have been tracking their progress. Then you know we need help. Your people are the only ones who have ever successfully fought the Devourers. We're asking for assistance. Admiral Chun's expression didn't change. 2 years ago, the Galactic Council determined that humanity was too dangerous to remain part of galactic civilization. You expelled us and ordered us never to return. Why should we involve ourselves in your crisis? The question hung in space between them like an accusation. Wind Through Stars felt the weight of every decision the Council had made, every vote. That had led to this moment. Because we were wrong, she said simply. We made a terrible mistake, and now billions of innocent beings are paying the price for our error. Yes, you did make a mistake, Admiral Chun agreed. But mistakes have consequences. The Council chose to handle galactic security without human involvement. Now you can face this threat the same way. Admiral, please, Wind Through Stars pleaded. We're not asking you to forgive us. We're asking you to help save the galaxy. For a moment, Admiral Chun's expression softened slightly. Minister, during our years of isolation, humanity has grown beyond what we were when you knew us. We've developed technologies and capabilities that you can't imagine. We could stop the Devourers, yes, but we could also do much more than that. She paused, letting the implications sink in. The Council expelled us because they feared we were too powerful, too unpredictable. They were right to fear us. What we've become since then would terrify you even more. I don't care, Wind Through Stars said desperately. Whatever you've become, whatever the cost, it has to be better than extinction. Admiral Chun studied the minister for a long moment. Behind her, other humans could be seen working at stations filled with technology that seemed almost magical in its advancement. The council made their choice, she said finally. They decided humanity was too dangerous to be trusted. They were probably right. But they also decided they could protect the galaxy without us. They were wrong about that. The transmission ended abruptly. The human ship turned and disappeared back into the energy barrier. Leaving the diplomatic mission alone in space. When Through Stars stared at the empty screen for a long time. Around her, the ship's crew waited in silence for orders that she couldn't bring herself to give. On the return journey to Council space, they received constant updates about the Devourer advance. More worlds consumed, more fleets destroyed, more billions of lives lost to an enemy that couldn't be.